Okay, welcome everyone. I think some folks might come on as we start, but we'll just get started. So Kathy couldn't be here today, so I'll be leading the meeting. I don't think we have any new people, but we also have Mark and Jay here from the steering committee. And we will probably start first with the NELSWIG, or the Northeast Loon Study Working Group agenda. I know that Mark was going to share some of the draft agenda with everyone.
Sure. Yeah. So
And
just to remind everybody what we're talking about, every year in March, in the Northeast region here, we have a working group. And we've had an in-person meeting every March for, oh Lordy, 30 something years. Anyway, and most years it's held at LPC, the Loon Preservation Committee in New Hampshire, where it will be held again this year, March 13th and 14th, a Thursday and a Friday. You're all welcome to come in person, but of course, in more recent years, there's also virtual options. And so everybody's invited virtually. And I just like 10 minutes ago got the updated agenda from Harry Vogel, who's the head of the Loon Preservation Committee. And I just wanted to briefly share that with everybody. So let me know when you can see my screen.
we can.
See it, yeah.
Okay, is it big enough to be legible?
Yes.
Oh, good. Sometimes that works. So basically 2 days, and I won't read through the entire thing. I can send this to Natasha for distribution. We can include this in the minutes, whatever you'd like to do. This is semi-final at this point. And so typically what we do is we start with a review of what's going on with loons here in the northeastern United States and adjacent Canada when we can convince some Canadians to participate. And then we have lunch, very important. And then we have various topics, and they vary from year to year. This year, we're talking specifically about non-breeding birds and some some questions about aging individuals and if there are any advances in that. Then we have an afternoon break, and then let's see if I can scroll this thing. There we go. And then after lunch, when everybody's full, we're going to do all the gross stuff and talk about all of the pathology and emerging disease issues. And we've got a variety of participants there going over clinical cases, talking about HPAI updates, what we know about avian malaria and advances on that that's being done in Ellen Martinson's lab at University of New Hampshire. And then we're going to finish the day with just some reviews of other ongoing research projects that have gotten going in the last year or so. Madison Harvey's a graduate student who's working on hearing in loons, the auditory system, the anatomy. I can talk more about that if people want. Walter Piper, who I think many of you know, is going to be talking about some of his observations in the Midwest. And then just a general conversation about what are the advances in research, what kinds of research projects we might want to be undertaking in the future. And then we all go out to dinner, which is that's the reason to come in person. Good food and, lots of coffee and tea and cocoa and things like that. Second day, we start out with contaminants. Micah from BRI will be talking about his PFAS work that many of us are involved with here in the Northeast. And LPC will focus on what they're doing in New Hampshire, particularly on Squam Lake with Tiffany Grotti's work. Then an update on some population work, and this will get outside of New England a little bit in that Katie Lowe, although she got her PhD at University of New Hampshire, is working mostly in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and they have their own working group out there, and she'll update us on that. Walter Piper will be back to talk about projects that he started, and we've also started here in the Northeast to try and develop digital image recognition using AI to get as much information as we can from loons that we haven't touched. This is partly a way to understand their biology better and partly a way to see if we can avoid grabbing them and banding them sometimes, and maybe identify them by shape or plumage patterns or bill patterns or other things, as is done with a lot of other species. You've probably seen that on novas on TV. Then we'll talk about some new advances that are taking place in telemetry. The second day, I'm sorry, after the break, for those of you who don't know B120, this was money that came to the Northeast region as oil spill mitigation money after the Bouchard oil spill back in, what was that, 2003, I think, something like that. And so a number of the groups in the Northeast, Maine Audubon, LPC in New Hampshire, the Adirondacks Loon program, some of the other programs here have gotten some of this mitigation money to carry out loon-friendly, loon enhancement activities, including more raft work, more lead tackle buyback work. And so people from LPC, Tracy Hart from Maine Audubon will be participating in these discussions and sort of updating it because we're getting into the last year of funding. And of course, for you folks in Minnesota, you're sort of familiar with this in that you're dealing with the Deepwater Horizon funds that came there post-oil spill and some of the things that are being done with agencies out there. Then after lunch, we'll have a quick update on this group, all the different working groups and what's going on in an attempt to get more people participating and let them know what's going on. And then we finish up the second day with this review of the future. What does everybody want to be doing? How can we collaborate better? And Natasha is going to kick that off by getting everybody all excited about the NLC and where things are going with that. And then again, just a general group discussion. So this doesn't have to be New England focused, obviously. So we're going to try and get everybody involved. And I think the wider participation we can get from this, frankly, the better. And thinking about how we can all work together across the continent. So that's it. That's the NELSWIG meeting in New Hampshire in, let's see. Yeah, 3 weeks. Hard to believe. I better start getting my slides together. All right, any questions?
Are you going to look at it? And I guess no one is at that meeting. Wakes.
I'm sorry, wakes?
Yeah, wakes.
Sure. This is the when you have boats going fast in a lake and they throw up like a wall of water,
Yes.
washes across the lake and can wash eggs out of nests or drown chicks or things of
I
that
know,
nature.
yeah, I'm familiar. I'm just wondering whether your meeting is going to have any discussion of that.
It was on the agenda last year. It's not formally included this year, but I'm sure it will come up. Yeah.
Yep.
And so, this is a good reason to invite more of you to participate because there are in both days open discussion sessions set up. And I think understanding, what people's priorities are will be important. And Jay, you're going to talk about the stewardship group when we do the working group review. I think you're on the agenda for that. So that too would be a logical place to bring up the whole wake boat issue as a focus for this group.
Mark, I have a question.
Yeah, sure, Sheila.
So like if I were to sign up to attend virtually, is it possible just to kind of like pop in,
Absolutely.
anytime?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it will be recorded as well. So
Oh, that's great. I might have company coming those 2 days. So if it's because there's a lot of topics I would like to attend for, but I don't know if I'll be able to hit them all.
that's fine. Well, as with so many meetings, I mean, a lot of the reason to attend these is not just the content, but it's making the interpersonal connections and knowing who's doing what and what the focus
Yeah.
of all these individuals is. So yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure,
Thanks for sharing, Mark. So I
absolutely.
think the form already went out for interest, but if people haven't signed up on that and they want to attend virtually or in person, should they reach out to you and Harry Vogel from LPC?
Yes, I would say that's
Okay.
probably the right thing to do. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm bummed that I won't be there in person, but I look forward to being there.
Oh, we love it when I understand we're a long way from Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit of travel going to South Carolina for Cassie, so a bit of travel in March.
There you go.
Everything happening in March.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll have some exciting new things for Jay to report on for the stewardship working group for Nelswig, in that we're hoping for this meeting to revitalize our subcommittees. We kind of started this back in the fall, and I don't know about other folks, but my winter has been almost as busy as the summer, believe it or not, and things have um we haven't kept up with the subcommittees, but it's talking with Mark and Jay and Kathy on the our steering committee folks about how we can maybe revitalize these groups and prioritize topics. Oh, and Mark, if you could just put either your email and Harry's email in the chat for folks to get the contact info for Nelswig. But on this first part of our stewardship meeting to uh, identify some priority topics for our subcommittees where we think we could produce something tangible this year by the end of the year, and where we could possibly fill a gap in our collective, Loon monitoring and community science efforts, knowing that in this group we have a variety of folks from different organizations or from lake associations or just, interested community members. So something that could help us all. And one of those things that we produced in previous years was our fact sheet. I'm going to share my screen here. And be looking here at the working group folder. So if you aren't familiar with our Google Drive folder, it's Loon Diver Stewardship Working Group, and that has all of our meeting agendas in there. And that has the fact sheet that we've put together. So hopefully that opens. And we had those action items on there for watch your wake, steer clear, leave no line, fish loon safe, keep it wild, reduce your impact. And that was a fact sheet that we could all distribute, in our own organizations or for, among community members if folks weren't a part of an official, loon conservation group. But a lot of our organizations, stop sharing for a second, have our own like specific outreach tools and things that we would distribute about lead tackle or about, maybe even voting or, loon sign. So for our subcommittees, thinking about something that the groups themselves can produce that might, add something new and could be usable by all. And I think a good example of that is with Jay's group with the nesting platforms. Some groups do have their own guidelines for nesting platforms, but having kind of a overall guidelines that we all agree upon that can be shared across groups could be helpful. And it could be something that, even like members of a lake association or community group, if they're looking for just a document that could be used, that could be shared around, that could be, something that we put together. And, that could also assist with community science and loon monitoring if then it's paired with some protocols for, best practices for monitoring guideline or platforms, best practices for putting on game cameras. So things like that. And so we want to not spread ourselves too thin among the group, but so hopefully in the next 10 minutes or so, we could have some group discussion and hear what some folks would think would be the best areas for our subcommittees. And so in the fall, we started with a Watch Your Wake, a fish loon safe, and a nesting platforms one. I think we're going to keep the nesting platforms one since that we're working on something. Our lead-based one, we had started thinking about maybe putting together a kind of directory of all regulations across, maybe across North America for what current like regulations are, what current practices are, or who to best speak to. So that could be something helpful. I remember the Watch Your Wake subcommittee back in the fall didn't have too much attendance, so we weren't sure if we would need to continue with that group, if maybe for the purpose of this working group, we've already done some outreach. We have had some shared, guidelines through the Help Protect Loons fact sheet. We've gotten together some folks in last year to come and share information with us. And so other opportunities for subcommittees could be one in line with the Keep It Wild action item of the fact sheet about, natural shorelines, maybe producing something about ways to maybe best assess shoreline for loon nesting suitability. And then finally, the reduce your impact, which was the most general guideline that we had on the fact sheet. But in our working group folder, we do already have a reporting form for fireworks impact. So maybe there's some interest also in ways for, shared protocols for monitoring things like fireworks, noise pollution, light pollution, things that might be growing. And so after that spiel for a little bit, I'd like to open the floor to discussion just to hear some thoughts. I may even try to experiment with a poll if I'm feeling adventurous and see maybe just try to pull the group and see what we're interested in. But feel free to share any thoughts, what you're thinking about potential subcommittees before we break out into those groups and hopefully have a chance to meet in the small groups.
I'm Frances Carmichael. I'm sorry my camera doesn't work. And I'm representing Safe Quiet Lakes and the Safe Wake Coalition, which is a Canadian group.
Great.
But so our interest is, in this case, wakes. And you have a handout already, I guess, that I'm sure we'd be interested in. And we have no legislation on wakes because all the legislation in Canada is federal and it's hard to move it, to change any rule. But, and there are no rules, but if you wanted a rule, it'd be very hard to get it. But is there a group, there is a group actually working on wakes? Is that right?
I think in the US we have different regional groups, state by state. I think there's different organizations, but as for our working group, we were potentially forming a subcommittee to focus on wakes, but it didn't have much participation in the last in the fall when we were thinking about forming subcommittees. And then what we've done previously in this group for the Loon Stewardship Working Group is we've invited some speakers from some of the organizations that are focusing on wake voting to speak. But I don't believe we have a specific group for.
Yeah, like Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Minnesota, and I don't know if we have one specific group in Minnesota for wake voting, but we have different organizations working on things related to it.
Yeah, and I think the same sort of thing would be true here in Maine. Tracy can probably speak to that better than I can, but certainly there are many lakes that have organized lake associations that work on their specific bodies of water or areas, counties and things like that. And we do have another organization, Maine Lakes, that's headed by Susan Gallo, that's sort of loosely coordinates and communicates among the lake associations here in Maine and works a lot with our state Audubon Society and so forth. Can't hear you, Tracy.
Let's see, can you? Oh.
There we go.
All right, well, I guess there's something's up with the earphones, but anyway, yeah, so Lakes Environmental Association is another one that's involved with the wake ordinance. So there are lakes in Maine that have their own voluntary ones, like some even asking for up to 500 feet from shore before wake boats operate. But the state one that was enacted last year was to be 300 feet from shore or depths greater than 15 feet.
So there is some state legislation in effect, but it's inadequate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I'm Brad Singer. I'm up in Maine for a fair bit of the summer and spring and fall up in central Maine, mid-coast Maine. And I fully agree with the lake. We did a big lake association meeting centered around loons. And, all the information you guys are talking about is great. The handouts. I mean, I think, I don't know, maybe there's been efforts, but how do we seems to me that, like on the wake and other related issues like the lead, preservation activities, getting the word all the way out to the people living on the lake. That's the key. So, maybe there's some efforts. And again, I'm new, so maybe you guys have done a lot of this in the past. I know you guys have done a lot of great work. But how do we kind of, give best practices about take this and meet with your lake association, bring people together? Because like I said, like our lake has I think it's a 200 foot. But until people hear the drama of, if you don't abide by that, bye-bye loons, they got to hear kind of in person that drama about what happens. So, maybe there's some efforts that are focused outwards at these networks of lake associations and really getting them on board to deliver these information in a form that the people living on the lake that really are doing the wake issues, are hearing and kind of learning and changing their behavior.
Yeah, Brad, I could speak in a microcosm on that from the Lake Association that I'm work
Yeah.
with. And this is Toddy Pond up in Penobscot, Maine.
Okay. Yeah, not far from McGinnicuddy.
Okay, and so we've got a public launch there,
Yeah.
and our Lake Association has a volunteer monitors at the launch every day of the week, mostly for invasive aquatic weeds and
Yeah,
for boat
same. Yeah.
inspections and things like that. But we also have a kiosk where there are posters right at the boat launch on fishing line and lead tackle and all these other sorts of things. And so the people who are doing the invasive plant exams of the boats are also talking to the owners as they put their boats
Yeah.
in. But one of the issues we have, Toddy's a relatively large lake, and most of the residents are seasonal. Fewer than 50% of the residents currently are members of the Lake Association, so that's something the Lake Association is working.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a multi-layered issue.
Right, yeah, you have guests, non-residents coming in on weekends, and
Sure.
it's very, very similar. Tough, but you have enough. Ours is very similar things. You have enough residents, I think, that to me, it's about enabling another 100, 200 people that do kind of really care about the lake and enlisting their, all good. I'm saying, all good things happening, but yeah, that's.
So would a topic be ideas for getting
Aside,
voluntary
Francis, I think you're
compliance?
cutting out. I'm not sure if that's for other
Sorry.
folks.
I'll
Try again.
repeat it and see if it works. Would a topic be ideas for getting voluntary compliance? What can people do to encourage people to self-regulate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Did you hear
think
that?
we did
Yeah.
hear that, and I think if we thought that would be something that we could get through on a wake specific subcommittee, that could be something for the committee to talk through ways to do that. Because some of I think here in the U.S., state by state, and maybe up in Canada, region by region, we have organizations that are putting out information, working on the outreach side, working on getting info for Lake Association for visitors. And so something that we could work on to get, that might have widespread use or might be something. But Sheila, you've had your hand up, so I want to make sure you could share.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the fishing thing, but I could kind of jump in here on wake boats too, because it's not just the wakes and, the shoreline damage, like on our chain, in which Natasha is probably familiar with, the Gull chain. She works over here for doing education. Most of our loon nests, a lot of them anyway, are in channels where the wake boats are going at no wake. But we have the big problem with the wake boats, wake surfing through chick rearing areas and sometimes running over loon families. So for me, the greater concern is what they're doing when they're out wake surfing, or there's these big, groups of kids that are driving the wake boats, and they're packed full of teenagers. And now what's happening is they're coming with packs of jet skis, and so they're wake surfing while their friends are against the law, going back and forth through the wakes and circling around. And we've got 4 loon families in this bay. So it's just like so unsafe. In addition to the damage that the wake boats are causing to the subsurface and the shoreline. So I was just kind of wondering, so like our lake association has produced a card that we distribute at the kiosks, and it goes in our newsletter, and I distribute it to all the boat rental places on the chain and the major resorts that rent boats, and it's a loon safe boating card. And so it touches on all aspects of loon safe boating. So what I was going to ask Natasha, because I haven't been attending these meetings for a while, is the loon safe fishing one just about lead? Because my big concern after this last year is loons getting hooked and tangled.
Yeah.
And just horrific injuries that happened that we were rescuing loons with. So if we could come up with, like, similar to the loon safe boating card, a loon safe fishing card that addresses lead poisoning, but also what to do to prevent hooking a loon, and then what to do, who to call if you hook a loon. And so our lake association was going to revamp our loon safe boating card to be loon safe boating on one side and loon safe fishing on the other side. And I would love to work on a subcommittee that included, hooking and entangled loons with, preventing lead poisoning. And I just wanted to know if that was an option.
Yeah, I think it can for sure, because on our, a lot of our different groups do lead outreach specifically, about the impact of lead tackle on loons and lead poisoning. But there's the other aspect of just, like you're saying, fishing itself. And that was one of our points on the Help Protect Loons fact sheet, was also leave no line and the impact of leftover line on the lake and causing entanglements. So that does sound like something new that a subcommittee could be working on, is maybe some new outreach tools or new things for specifically the other parts of that gets involved in loon safe fishing. And so I think I'm hearing that we have interest still, in addition to the platforms, there's still interest in a lead or fish loon safe subcommittee, and there's still interest in a wake or safe boating committee as well. Would there also be interest in committees on one under keep it wild, like on our fact sheet, but that would be about natural shorelines? Would there be any interest in that one, or in a reduce your impact one on some of those larger topics like the fireworks and noise and light or other aspects?
Natasha, one thing I was gonna say, not on those two topics, but
Hmm.
it does seem like a lot of these groups also do loon count type things or population type studies. I was wondering if possibly we should consider that as one of the groups as well. But yeah,
Sure.
but certainly I think there's need for the shoreline ones and the impacts as well.
I'd be happy to work on the wake one, and I'm losing now. I've lost your pictures, so I'm actually just going to. I think it's not working for me this at the moment, so I'll talk to you later.
Maybe there's kind of a subcommittee or some efforts that kind of cuts across all those issues, because I think when we worked with the Lake Association, we touched on all these issues. I'm wondering whether there's one that kind of liaisons with lake associations or other bodies that kind of brings the whole piece together and says, here's the 4 big pieces of loon conservation preservation activities for the lake. And Mark, you may know this one, Look Out for Loons and the Maine Audubon does some good work there that we worked with. But again, maybe there's one, in addition to the committees focused on wake, shoreline, other tackle, maybe there was one that kind of brings best practices to kind of help educate and brings kind of a bundle of work together that the subcommittees are working on for.
Well, I'd say that's kind of what this overall group is, and that's where
Okay.
we put together the fact sheet that had all of the components on it as a piece that we could send out to to groups and have all of the information. And we've been discussing lately as a steering committee just ways to keep the momentum of the group going, and that could be, focusing on some specific priority areas with the subcommittees and focusing on some elements where we might need, that could fill in the gap somewhere on some of those specific areas. But yeah, I'd say that the overall fact sheet that we put together was with the goal to bring all of those topics into one fact sheet that we had with similar talking points and areas. But so there's earlier before that, Tracy, I think proposing an idea of a specific subcommittee for loon counts, for an annual loon count, or maybe for like best practices for also the seasonal loon monitoring, or specifically for um, the annual census.
I would think monitoring in general. I mean, different states do it differently. We have the once a year point count sorts of things like Tracy was talking about. And then I think depending on the state and the human resources available, the sort of thing that Sheila does with her groups is they've got people out much more frequently collecting data. So it varies so much from state to state. We've got some states, I mean, I see John is on from LPC, where you've got one organization in the state that is sort of the Swiss Army knife. They do it all, on all the lakes in their state. But that's not that common.
Like Minnesota has, guidelines for lake associations about, doing the nesting survey and then like a July adult and chick count. But, we've been doing it on our lake association. I've got records going back to 2012 that before I started, but we've discovered, just over the years as we've been doing it, and it's a big chain, like, we've kind of changed the protocols to try to make it more accurate, which goes beyond the DNR guidelines, so yeah, I'd be interested to see how other states do it too. It's kind of jumping around here, but our lake association has really developed quite a few things. And so one thing that we have is actually our lake association started the Lake Steward program, which has now become a state program. So I do have a lot of resources if anybody wanted to do that subcommittee. Personally, I don't want to be on it, but I kind of got, I just want to stick with loons. I mean, I know this relates to loons, but I've got lots of information I could share with the group. And I know Natasha does already from what the Loon Center's been doing. So I could just share that. But I personally would kind of like to be on two subcommittees because I'm really interested in the loon safe fishing, but also the platforms. So if there's a way to kind of schedule things so people can do more than one, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point for multiple committees that some people may be interested in, and that might be as keep meeting, determining the best meeting times, if it's something that we have during this meeting where subcommittees can do breakout rooms, or if we have it as separate meetings, which makes it a little more difficult. I think that's part of the issue that we ran in when we tried to do the subcommittees, was in trying to get times outside of it, being busy. But we'll try to, I think, find the best solution as we moving forward. I just tried putting a poll with all of possible subcommittees ideas that we could have, just so we have some time today to meet in the breakout groups. And I think I set it up that if you select an answer on the poll, you will get put into that breakout room. So we'll see if that works. After all these years of using Zoom, I'm trying things that I haven't done before. So let's see. The general loon monitoring group, that would be in that subcommittee. I don't believe I even set
Just
it up, but
say,
I could go.
all right, I'll just say, I really like the idea of doing a working group more geared towards like the community science and like census. type monitoring. Because just to speak for like comparison between ACLC here in New York and LPC in New Hampshire, we have like a small subset of monitoring lakes that we cover every summer, and we monitor our lakes on a weekly basis versus John, not to speak for you, but LPC covers pretty much every breeding lake in New Hampshire. So there's a lot of differences between what different groups do in terms of like their seasonal monitoring throughout the summer. But in terms of the census, it seems like that's pretty similar between groups. I know there still are differences, but I think it'd be awesome to talk about the census where I think making little tweaks and comparing would be a bit more easy.
Yeah, I think that we're getting strong support for that group. I'm seeing a lot for the loon monitoring group, a lot for fishing loon safe, a lot for platforms. I think we might, just so that we focus on things, would based off this poll focus on these three subcommittees. Because in going back to our working group goals, we wanted to strengthen the community of community scientists, volunteers, working professionals. So I think that definitely makes sense to have a working group on the community science side, um, as well as some of these ones on kind of the overall conservation topics as well. Because as a group, with stewardship, we're kind of a broad topic area looping in community science with conservation and management. And so hopefully as we break into the breakout groups, we could also, for the platforms and for the fishing loon safe one, think about something that we could produce that would even assist community science programs, like with platforms of best practices for monitoring platforms after we build them, for fishing loons. Maybe it's a protocol. I don't know if we have some type of shared protocol for documenting injuries or loons getting entangled, and so maybe there's an outreach aspect and a community science aspect we can work on both of these topics. But okay, I think it'll end poll, and hopefully this works where we can meet. So we're at um about a little over halfway through. I think originally, oh wait, I missed. Okay, I think I missed the button to form into breakout rooms, so I'll try to do some manual breakout rooms. So the recording will not continue in for the main group when we're in breakout rooms. So if there is a member of each breakout group that could um record possibly, so that we could share this and put it back into the um overall meeting. I'm just trying to talk and type at the same time, so apologies if I'm not coming across clear, but will have our subcommittee groups for fish loon safe platforms, and then I'll put a monitoring one for the community science aspects, and it should let you choose which room that you'll go in. And so you can use the one that you did in the poll or pick a room, and then I do want to have some time for us to regroup at the end. So I will have these groups end after about 15 minutes. I know that's not too much time, but just to give us an initial time to meet, and talk about a group, maybe identify someone who could, once we get back for the last 5 minutes, report on the group, who could be the lead, who could take some notes. And we do have in the working group folder in the Google Drive, we already have folders for it's called Get Rid of Lead. We have the Help Loons Find a Home folder for platforms, and we could probably create a new folder down the road for loon monitoring. But with that, I'll open all rooms, and then we can break out. And if it does not show you an option, let me know, but it should pop open. Okay, I'm just figuring out how to get the main group, everyone set up. It looks like there are some folks that haven't joined groups. Okay, there's Mark.
It took me a
Hi,
minute
Mark.
to figure out how to get it.
Okay,
So,
sorry. Yeah, I'm still just kind of monitoring the main group. There's a couple people. Jay hasn't joined the platforms one, so oh, there he goes.
yeah,
And I
Jillian,
think
Jillian,
okay,
quick message. Is that we've got your dissection guide that you left at Tufts.
Oh,
And so, uh, we've got your dissection guide that you left at Tufts. And so,
oh, okay.
one of the students will be bringing it up to Nelswig to give back to you.
Excellent. Okay, thanks so much.
Yes, no problem.
okay. I think we are still, since I'm still recording, I think this should be recording our breakout group as well. But we might miss some moments from the other breakout groups. But I'm gonna just see if I can send a message to folks to remind them that. But please begin the discussions while I just in distraction. Okay, I don't think I can fully figure out how to message everyone, so thought I had this planned out, but not
Don't worry about it.
entirely.
Tricky.
This is how we
I
learn.
think it works. Yeah, hopefully it works. But um, okay, I will. Well, originally when this group we met, I think back in September, I met. There were some other different folks on the subcommittee, and we kind of identified. Well, Mark, Maddie, and I were on there. Denise from Adirondack Group was on there, and we talked about maybe a general education piece directory on North American led regulation and policies. But I think, yeah, I'm not sure. Thinking about now, I'm thinking about the new way to think about the groups, if that'll be maybe what's most needed. I what you're saying, Sheila, about some education and maybe even ways to document the cases of injury
Yeah.
and fishing line. Because when we talk about, yeah, fishing loon safe, we can very easily document through the mortality studies lead poisoning, but there's a whole area where we could be talking
Yeah.
about the entanglements and
Yeah.
maybe there's a yeah, maybe there's two things we could do, like the loon safe fishing card, like an outreach piece, and then also a shared like form or data sheet that we can share
Yeah.
around to
Yeah.
get data on that
Yeah.
and see nationally what kind of region that or problem that is,
Yeah.
even region by region.
You
I
know,
think I
so
could- oh, sorry, go ahead, Sheila.
sorry, I was just going to say in terms of like documenting like the hooking and entanglement injuries, which kind of go hand in hand, because a lot of the ones like that we were seeing last summer with loon rescue and fall, badly hooked. And then there's all that line that was attached to the hook that's tangled around their bodies in different ways. So I'm just speaking about Minnesota, but in Minnesota, we've got wildlife rehab and release, who's doing a lot of loon rescuing now in that 7-county metro area. And now that we've got our sort of launching our Minnesota Loon Rescue Network, and I'm working pretty closely with WRR now, that I think between our two groups, we can document, how many hooked and entangled loons we're getting calls on, and the ones we're actually able to, capture.
Yeah.
And then we've got, Wildlife Rehab Center and the other wildlife rehab centers around the state that get them. So, maybe in Minnesota, I'm thinking that's the way we could collect data, but I don't know about the other states.
Yeah, I think it is easier in some states. New Hampshire will have really good data on that. Because again, it's a small state, they're centralized with LPC. And so, a lot of the loons that they get, they're either untangled and released on site, or they're untangled and taken to temporary rehabilitation and go out. So an awful lot of the ones that are entangled don't die, which is great. If they're good rescue networks in the area. But I agree with you, collecting those data is tough because it's like the Grenzers Facebook group. There are volunteers on lakes all over the place who periodically will get a loon and, disentangle it and just let it go. And you never hear about that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we've got the boundary waters in Minnesota, and I'm not a boundary waters camper, but I was talking to somebody who is, and they said that this just breaks my heart, but they said there's tons of them that are hooked up in the boundary waters.
I'm not surprised. Yeah. And again, it's almost like we need to make a list of all the different problems. As an example, Jillian came out to Tufts, what was it, Sunday morning? We did some loon necropsies there. And, she had one bird that had two hooks, one that it had swallowed that was in the gizzard, and one that was embedded in the leg. I don't think either one was clinically significant, but there was no line. That had the bird died from something else. And so we've got this whole mishmash of different kinds of cases. When we x-ray loons, either live loons that we're capturing in the field for banding or dead ones that come in for necropsies, I'll bet you more than 50% have swallowed fish hooks. We see fragments of fish hooks in there. Mostly it's not clinically significant, but it is interesting. And when they swallow monofilament, they break it down. If it's in there, as long as it, but then you get into microplastics issue, which is a whole nother, thing. And so we've got, the ones that are entangled that die, the ones that are entangled that don't die. And then, sometimes I think, particularly with the public, they'll rescue a loon, they'll unentangle it, and they'll let it go. But they weren't able to evaluate the bird's physical condition. And so one of the questions is, does the bird survive after you let it go? Yeah.
And, back to the education piece, I think a big thing, it would be prevention, which is like the basic thing. Like if there's loons nearby, you pull in your lines.
Yeah.
Or you switch spots.
Yeah.
And, some people just aren't willing to do that, which kills me.
Yeah. Well, and Jillian's a state biologist, and Jillian, you can speak to this better than me, but at some of the lakes and boat launch places, don't you have monofilament collection tubes or something like that for?
We do. We have the monofilament and light collection tubes. We have them at the boat launches at Quabbin, and then at like a lot of the busier gates. We do try to, like, Wachusett Reservoir there's so many fishermen on opening day. It's unbelievable. They just line up the shoreline. So we try to go out on that day and talk to people. Same thing as like what Sheila's saying, and ask people because the loons have learned to just cruise the shoreline because there's live bait. So we ask them to pull it in. I'd say half of the fishermen are cooperative. Some of them won't even talk to us.
Yeah.
Some get angry. So, but we still try.
So in Minnesota, our DNR won't let us put the monofilament line collection things at the boat launches because I don't want to deal with having to empty them.
See, we have lake associations emptying them.
But they're just, but you know what? We would, but they still won't. And then, we do have the AIS people that are checking the boats as they go in and out. And we asked if we could, particularly on the busy weekends, if we could have Lake Association volunteers there to talk to people. And the DNR wouldn't let us do that either.
Lordy.
They just like, it's too busy. We don't want you bothering people. So all we have is our kiosks
Yeah.
with the
Is-
information and the
Is all
signs.
that since Carol Henderson resigned? I know he was a great champion for public involvement, but
Yes, it's
since
it's
he retired,
definitely since he resigned.
yeah, he retired, yeah.
So I wish we could do more with like you're doing, Jillian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't known that about the fishing line because I had wanted to do that on one of our exhibits was to add
Mm.
the fishing line, and then I was
Mhm.
having a hard time figuring out just how to get started with that. But
Well,
now it sounds like maybe.
If it's not a DNR landing,
Oh,
it
okay.
has
So
to,
it's
it's the D,
only.
it's the landings that the DNR controls. So at
Oh, okay.
Government Point, over at the Army Corps Engineers on Gull, they have them, the fishing line
Okay.
collection things. And Jillian, I wanted to ask you, are people really using them? Are they one of the complaints you hear is that people will just put trash in them instead of fishing
yeah, that
line?
happens too.
Yeah, I was going to chime in because we've collected. I mean, I'm only like 7 water bodies in the state of Massachusetts, and then Mass Wildlife handles the rest. But on our water bodies where we have them, they've been really successful. We get about 25 miles of fishing line a year, but it
Wow.
is disgusting and you have to keep up with it. And a lot of times I'll get a call like from our rangers just a couple weeks into fishing season and they're jam packed. And I can say Dunkin' Donuts coffee cups and Gatorade bottles jam them up all the time.
Um,
So you do have to keep up with them.
yeah.
I can check, Natasha, with Brian at Government Point and see, what success they're having with them.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting in Minnesota too. And of course, I'm speaking as a non-Minnesotan, so take it for what it's worth. But I mean, you've got multiple groups involved in this. I mean, you've got the National Loon Center, you've got the DNR, you've also got the water pollution control folks. Steve Yang and Kevin,
Yeah.
what's his name, and even if this is not easy now, I wonder if this is a goal to work towards in the future. Particularly if you can say to them, this works in other states.
Mhm.
We have state agencies in, and then we'll have to find out which, but New Hampshire and Maine and other states collaborating with this and with lake associations. And again, it may not be possible now, but maybe it's a target for the 5-year plan or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's great to have some like things that we could do this year, some long-term goals to just keep the momentum going, keep action going, and I think for sure having like shared maybe what this subcommittee can
Yeah,
do is
yeah,
put
yeah.
together what's worked in other states so
Yeah.
that it's helpful for
Mhm.
us in all our different areas to say, okay, here's what's worked here. Let's try that in our state. We can bring it it needs to be
Yeah.
brought to.
Yeah, it would be good to involve Tracy Hart at Maine Audubon in this because, one of the things they did with their oil spill mitigation money is they bought a lot of, PVC tubes.
Oh yeah.
And they just bought the tubes and then they gave them to the lake associations with instructions about how to make this is collection for lead, this is collection for fishing line. And the state
Yeah.
wildlife agency encouraged them, in fact, to put them up at the boat launches.
That's great. Our 15 minutes run out, but I like that point. I can kind of briefly summarize this to the main group, but I'm gonna close the breakout groups now so that we can then report back to the main group.
All right, do we have
Thank
to do
you.
something to add? Okay.
I think we have 60 seconds. And all right, everyone. Okay, hopefully, I think it took a minute for us all to get the breakout room set up, but I think we all made it into our rooms and we had some good conversations. I'm just hoping in our last 5 minutes of the meeting, someone from each group can share what their group talked about, maybe some short-term goals, something that can be done this year, and maybe ideas for the future. And I could start with the Fish Loon Safe subgroup. We talked a bit about the education piece and prevention of not just lead poisoning, but fishing line entanglement. We talked about a way to have a shared documentation system so that we can have better reporting of those injuries of entanglements, and maybe see how that's varying across the different loon breeding regions. And then lastly, we talked about some resource sharing, specifically with the topic of the fishing line collection boxes, so that, in some cases where we don't have that set up, we could have success stories from other states, and we can bring that, to our local area or our state agency and have that reporting. So we kind of talked about three different areas, and I think have a good starting point. How about someone from the platform committee could share? And I'm going to try one more poll just to get a sense of how people might want to prefer these subcommittees to meet. And so I'm going to do that poll, and hopefully that won't be too distracting as we're sharing from the platform committee and then the monitoring committee first, and wrapping up the meeting.
So
Maybe.
I guess I kind of represent the platform group. If anybody would like to be a member of it, I'm going to drop my email in the chat so that you can feel free to contact me. We briefly just went over our outline that we created at the last breakout. I think that was 2 months ago. And as best practices and questions that we're kind of interested in as the group. Hopefully from that, we can take the top 6 and maybe create a pamphlet similar to the one that we created as a group as a whole, and that's one of our sort of action items. The second was perhaps what we would like to do just to get a feel of the diversity of things that people do, to actually create a quick, not maybe quick, but a poll with respect to the practices regarding some of the issues, whether it's determining where a platform needs to be, how to deploy it, how to monitor it, best design, how long the platform should be out, when to retrieve it, all those types of things I think are important. Then we talked about a time where we can meet probably in 3 weeks outside of this group to really start working on that. And then lastly, I wanted to make sure everybody has access to the resources. As you know, there's a folder there that has a number of research papers that have looked at platforms, whether it's platform design by Krista Sorbo, looking at impacts of platforms on loon behavior and loon productivity. There have been a number of papers out there, and so there is a folder. I'm not sure it's in the right place, though. I think it's actually in the Loon Rescue Rehab and Triage group for some reason, so I think I need to move it somewhere. Yeah, I think that's where we kind of stand there. And so that's kind of we have homework that we're going to try to do so that we can meet and start talking about some of these issues. That help? And anything else that needs to be added by the group? I hope I spoke well.
Get a thumbs up. Okay, awesome. And finally, someone from the monitoring group. And if you can't see the poll, I know that your group already talked about, Jay, about when to meet outside of it, but I just wanted to get a sense of when people might prefer to meet overall. So if you see that poll, yeah, especially to give opportunities for being part of multiple groups, we might want to explore some options. So I just threw some 3 options in there. But yes, without further ado, our monitoring group, do we have someone from that subcommittee that could report to everyone?
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'll go ahead. So we talked a little bit about monitoring in Wisconsin, where Brandy is, and Maine, where Phil Keefe was sitting in, and then in New Hampshire, and Brad Singer was also from Maine. But we talked about the differences between the single-day loon census and the season-long monitoring efforts, and how much information you can glean from the single-day snapshot. Phil pointed out that you really can get some estimate of the trend, the population trend over time in Maine from that. But we started to think about what the subgroup would be able to focus on in terms of comparisons, like between a single day and a season long monitoring effort, or between a volunteer community science monitoring effort and a trained professional or semi-professional staff. I know a comparison like that was done in Wisconsin between the state DNR surveys and the volunteer surveys. An analysis of that was done, but on a broader scale for all of our monitoring programs, it'd be good to have some sense of the detection probabilities from those different efforts or the different styles of monitoring. So that presented itself as an initial first avenue or theme to explore. And we closed by just talking a little bit about how cool it'd be to benefit from things like eBird or iNaturalist that are already out there, or the potential for more tech savvy mobile data entry on the part of our own programs. And so we're looking forward to hearing what's been done in that regard from Vermont and at the NELSWIG program coming up. Hopefully I left time for any other thoughts if others in the group wanted to add.
So I think that sounds really cool. I mean, eBird and iNaturalist, there's lots of potentials and yeah, things where we can get more info about loons outside of the main kind of May through August time period. So I think it sounded like all of our groups had some really good discussion and starting points. And we're just about the end of our hour, and it looks like, based off just this quick poll, that people might prefer maybe meeting in these subcommittee groups sometimes during the main meeting time, but are willing to meet outside of the working group meeting, which is great to know. I think that's insightful. And as we're, I think as a steering committee, maybe Mark and Jay, and along with Kathy, we might meet soon to think about best times for the subcommittees and the main meeting groups and how we schedule these both in. So folks, stay tuned with us. We will get these subcommittees going, but we appreciate everyone's time today. If anyone has any last final thoughts, we can share that. Otherwise, I'll end the meeting so the folks that are also attending rescue rehab have a little bit of a break. Yes, thumbs up. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, Tom.